Hey everybody, my name's Ed. Okay, so we're going to do another mini-series review. This one's going to be Cinder and Ashe from 1988, written by Gerry Conway and the artist by Jose Garcia Lopez. So we have issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, and issue 4. Okay, so this was a mini-series, like I said, published by DC Comics in '88. It is suggested for mature readers. While the format's a little bit different than their standard superhero fare, it doesn't seem to be part of the regular DCU superhero continuity. It wasn't part of a separate line, such as like the Vertical line, which hadn't been established yet. Interestingly enough, it's 4 issues. We're so used to like minis being like 6 issues and 12 issues now, but it was like 4 issues, which was kind of the almost standard for the time. If you flip through it, you see ads for other miniseries, and they're all like about 4 issues or so. Okay, so we're just going to get into it in a moment, so just hang on. Hey. Okay, so the premise is Jacob Ashe and Cinder Dubois are a couple of private eyes who are hired by a farmer to find his missing daughter. Through their investigations, they are reacquainted with a mysterious man from their past, and they learn how the case ties to a current politician. Ashe is a Cajun former Marine, and Cinder is a half-black, half-Vietnamese former street urchin who has acquired a college education in the United States. And throughout flashbacks, we learn how they meet and what their background has to do with the most recent case. Okay, so Cinder and Ashe is a pretty straightforward action crime story without any superhero or supernatural elements. It's pretty much part of the back to Nam trend in pop culture during the time. Vietnam and pop culture in the 80s, it was a thing. Rambo was a very popular movie, or Rambo First Blood Part 2, I should say. Missing in Action, Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, Year of Dragon, that was directed by Oliver Stone. The original source material didn't have too many Vietnam references in it, but when Oliver Stone got a hold of it, he rewrote chunks of it to have all those type of references in it. On TV, you had characters like Sonny Crockett from Miami Vice was a Vietnam vet. Mac B.I. was a Vietnam vet. The A-Team, all those characters were Vietnam vets. Again, you still have movies like Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter were part of the popular consciousness. Other TV shows from the 80s, like Tour of Duty and China Beach, they were actually set during the war. You had songs like Frontline by Stevie Wonder, Still in Saigon by Charlie Daniels, 19 by Paula Hardcastle, of course, Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, were all big hits back in the 80s. Okay, Vietnam in comic books. I'd say Vietnam's been referenced in comics for years. Iron Man's first origin originally took place in Vietnam, and when the series introduced James Rhodes, who later became War Machine, Rhodey was a Vietnam vet. One of the more popular B-level characters, like Punisher, was originally a Vietnam vet. There's an obscure character from DC Comics in the 70s called Ragman. He was a Vietnam vet. Let's see here. There was there was an anthology black and white war magazine called Blazing Combat, published in the 60s by Warren Publishing, which included stories set in Vietnam. This is why it was happening. It was canceled due to low sales and distribution. The rumor I read, I'm not 100% certain on this, is that it didn't get big distribution in the South, supposedly, I guess, presumably because of potential version, which is more content. Like I said, stories about Vietnam, Vietnam is happening, maybe not. I don't know. But I gotta say this: some of the war comics that were set in World War II, for instance, Sergeant Rock, would include symbolic or metaphorical references to what was happening in Vietnam, despite being set during a different conflict. I'm thinking really specifically of there's a pretty famous or infamous cover where one of the soldiers has shot some people, and he says to Sergeant Rock, "I got them all. The enemy didn't get away." And Sergeant Rock points and goes, "But those were the civilians." It's clearly a reference to the My Lai incident. Let's see here. Oh, I also wanted to admit that. Okay, so right there, the wind just got a little bit out of control. But what I was going on about is in the mid late 80s, again, we had this comic called The Nam that was put out by Marvel Comics, of all people. And it was a realistic portrayal of the Vietnam War from the U.S. grunt's point of view. It was spun off from a backup series in the 1980s version of Savage Tales, but the comic was written by a guy who actually did serve in real life in Vietnam. So okay, so the creators, Gerry Conway was the writer, Jose Garcia Lopez was the artist. Conway has been a writer for Marvel and DC Comics for years, as well as being a screenwriter and a television producer. Lopez has had a long running career in comics, mostly as an artist for DC Comics. Cinder and Ashe starts off in New Orleans. Like I said, a farmer contracts Cinder and Ashe to find his missing daughter. They agree. They find out that she's maybe been taken by a biker gang. This might have connections to a CIA man who Cinder and Ashe knew in Vietnam named Lacey. Lacey has these criminal connections in Nam and seems to have continued his enterprises in the United States. We later discover how this is connected to a top local politician. And again, like I said, along the way through flashbacks, we discover how Cinder, biracial Vietnamese street urchin, and Ash, a Cajun Marine, how their relationship developed over the years and how they formed their current partnership. We jump back and forth through time and space and goes from New Orleans to Saigon to Washington, D.C. Now, again, bringing in a larger context to this, or pop culture context, a lot of movies and TV shows about Nam in the 80s seem to have been about uh, they seem to be about trying to recontextualize the war. So a lot of times, why the stories didn't necessarily ignore the horror and tragedy of the war, depending on which one you saw, many of them stepped back from the political reasons that America got involved in the conflict in the first place, and many of them really focus on the sacrifices of the American soldiers and present them as well-meaning soldiers and sometimes pawns of uncaring politicians. The previous decade had movies and TV shows with stereotypes of shell-shocked and crazy vets, stuff like Rolling Thunder, Taxi Driver, etc., or sad vets who were screwed over by the system. Who will stop the rain? Like I said, 80s pop culture tried to portray the vet in a more sympathetic light, saw the vets as well-meaning people who've been manipulated by either cynical politicians, while at the same time still being trying to be sympathetic towards the people of South Vietnam. Again, depending on which one you picked up. The Cinder and Ashe mini deals with not only the war of Vietnam itself, but also the fallout of the war, both personal and political. Other themes that are touched on have to do with the farm crisis, which happened in the 80s, the plight of Asian boat people, and all these issues intertwine with the mystery quite nicely. And the pacing, while not perfect, it's pretty decent. The characterization is handled pretty well. It's also interesting that the comic is labeled suggested for mature readers, but aside from one panel or two, there's really isn't any nudity. I feel like this is something that could have been maybe aired in primetime television. At best, it probably would have been rated maybe PG-13. I think it was a theatrical release. Okay, so the art again is by Jose Garcia Lopez, a longtime artist at DC Comics. He does a pretty solid job here. His art's kind of realistic, but it also works in an action adventure format. He's really great with anatomy and dynamic poses and good figure work. And he's also able to do realistic clothing and setting, which is great for a series like this. So just to give you a little taste here, pow, ba-bang, cha-ching, harumph, pow. Pretty decent layouts. I mean, they're all pretty clear. Kazinga, charumph. You know, good good use of like close-ups, mid shots, Latui, Fabam. Okay, so not to give too much of it away. What the hell? I have no idea what the original plans for the series were. It feels like it could have been a tryout for a possible ongoing series. It almost feels like it could have been a pilot for a TV series as well. In certain ways, it almost feels like it could have been a buddy movie as well. You know, you've got the two partners with their heavily contradicting backgrounds and personalities, and they're brought together through circumstances and have to fight for like a common goal. And you've got their personalities bouncing off each other. Ash is older, more wisecracking, more compassionate. Cinder is younger and smarter, but a bit more cynical. Then you've got the New Orleans setting. That's also interesting, as Conway and Lopez could have this background for the characters that's multicultural and could provide any number of crime or exotic locations, springboards for other types of stories. Okay, so in conclusion, it's a really interesting miniseries. Takes on a really interesting subject matter. Nice art, well paced. It's a little too bad it wasn't a little bit more popular. Also, it's another example of DC trying to take chances in the early, or I should say, the mid '80s. Post Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then trying to expand the readership in the direct market, which was becoming more important in the comics market at that time as well. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. You guys have a great day.